Hi, everyone. Welcome back, and thanks so much for joining us. This is the first episode of 2020. So excited to be here with Erik Clemons, the Executive Director of ConnCAT and ConnCore, who also serves on the Board of Education for the state of Connecticut and on the board of a new initiative tackling at-risk youth and other issues that he's going to tell us about. So, Erik, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Teresa.
Thank you for speaking with my students. They were all so inspired. They came up to me after class and were like, "Oh, thank you for bringing him."
Oh, wow, that's great.
So what I'm hoping to talk to you about is the different levels of impact that you work at. So maybe first we can start by you sharing a little bit about what you do. Tell us about your work.
Yeah, I'm the
briefly.
founding CEO and president of the Connecticut Center for Arts and Technology, better known as ConnCAT, here in New Haven at Forest Science Park. What we do at ConnCAT is kind of threefold. One is workforce development training for unemployed, underemployed adults who mostly live in New Haven. Secondly is arts after school and summer programming for young kids, grades 5 through 8, mostly from New Haven Public Schools. And thirdly, we have a statewide entrepreneurship academy that focuses on entrepreneurship and business mechanics for high school students throughout the state. And we are now moving, and I'm super excited about this, into adult entrepreneurship training as well.
Okay, and tell us a little bit about the results you've gotten from ConnCAT in terms of job placements.
Yeah, so we have about at least over 400 adults have gone through our programs. We are at the aggregate, we have 3 training programs: medical billing and coding, phlebotomy, 2 medical training programs. And we did those medical training programs based on Yale New Haven Hospital's needs, as Yale is the largest employer in New Haven, second largest in the state, second to the state itself. And then we also have a culinary program, and again, those are for folks who, up to 30% who are been incarcerated. And so we wanted to create a second chance for folks and also train cooks, given the proliferation of restaurants in and around New Haven. Our 3 training programs, we are about 70% job placement rate.
That's huge.
Yeah, and it's going incredibly well. And even more important than the job placement rate is the transformation of lives, because these folks have now have a training under their belt, and they see life differently, right? And they see what's possible beyond the conditions that they see every day. And I think that, to me, is absolutely incredible watching that.
And you've built this from scratch in the past how many years?
Started building in 2011. Took a year to build, and this was in our 15,000 square foot space upstairs in our building. And then moved downstairs after 3 years and built a culinary school with a restaurant, a 40-seat restaurant connected to it. And so we have done what we have done and achieved in a matter of 8 years.
And now recently, the past year or two, you started thinking about, as you put it today in class, what is the next iteration of impact? And I wrote that on the board because I was like, yeah, he's always iterating. He's always asking, how can I go to the next level?
Yeah.
So the first level of impact was direct service. So ConnCAT serves people who have not had the opportunity to acquire the skills necessary for today's job market. Some of them don't even have a high school degree, so you help them get the GED and then help place them in jobs. But you can't reach everyone.
That's right.
And so now you're working at 2 different levels. So that's at the individual level. So next we'll talk about the community level. So a lot of these people are from certain parts of New Haven. There's so much inequities across New Haven. And so now you're thinking about investing in community. So that's where ConnCore comes in. And I understand it's only a year or 2 old.
Yeah.
So tell us about ConnCore.
So I had been thinking about the critical mass of adults, especially who have gone through our training programs, who are now, again, working full-time, paying taxes, feeling differently about who they are and who they could be because they have a skill under their belt and their lives have been transformed. And, some of them now, if not most of them, now have these aspirations and dreams of owning a home or also starting their own business if, in fact, they have an entrepreneurial spirit. And so I went to my board chair, Carlton Highsmith, and we started talking about, what is the next iteration of impact we could make, given that there's this critical mass of folks who are seeing life differently. How do we create an environment whereby we can facilitate their dreams? And so we started this thing called ConnCAT, which is the Connecticut Community Outreach Revitalization Program, where it was a way where we could scale our impact and scale hope, too. And so we had our eyes fixed on a 8-acre plot of land called the Dixwell Plaza, because we knew we could purchase a building on the Dixwell Plaza, which was the old Seatown building, because we had a relationship with someone who had a relationship with the owner who was looking to sell this building, and said, well, you know what, we can do something with this and scale impact and move deep into the community, in the Dixwell community. And because of that, the city knew what we were thinking about doing. They had a plan already for Dixwell Plaza, but had not operationalized their plan. And we met with the city, and they said, you guys need to dream bigger and look at the entire plaza. And so we conspired to then try and acquire the properties in the Dixwell Plaza, which, and also, I failed to mention, we have a CEO and president of ConnCAT, Paul McCraven, who is the person who has really gotten traction in terms of really facilitating the mission of ConnCAT. And so Paul has been acquiring these properties, and we've master planned the entire 8 acres, programmed the entire 8 acres, and the program is really predicated on what we heard articulated to us by the community as their needs. And so we are...
Which are?
And so safety, early childhood, jobs, housing, arts and culture, and food, restaurants, or supermarket.
Right.
And so we now are endeavoring to build a 300-seat performing arts center, a museum, and a art gallery. Bring a supermarket there, a small box, maybe 20,000 square feet supermarket there, a 15-restaurant food hall, a 50,000 square foot commercial building, 150 units of housing, 30 townhouses, which will be home ownership, because as you know, 15% of the Dixwell residents are homeowners, which means 85% are not. And so we wanted to do something about that. Because we believe that home ownership especially is a huge lever to wealth building, right? And so everything we're doing is about fighting poverty and wealth building, especially for those residents. A line of retail spaces we're going to build and really bring beauty and dignity and utility to that community, which to me has been neglected.
And revitalizing that space.
Absolutely revitalize it and transform it.
And I think that one thing I haven't mentioned yet is that although I understand your funding model is philanthropic, that you raise funds to be able to do this, everything you do also has some form of self-sustaining ability. For example, with the culinary school, you opened a series of cafes, I think now 4 across New Haven, that are bringing in revenue to sustain at least a certain part of the operations.
Yes.
And ConnCAT also will have... It's a development project.
Exactly.
Like it will revitalize the community, and it will help ConnCAT expand its work. I think.
Exactly. So right now, through ConnCAT, we have 3 existing businesses and are poised to open a 4th, probably in August. And those 3 existing businesses, one, probably most importantly, create jobs for our students who are graduating from our program. And secondly, they cash flow in a way where we take that the revenue and just pour it back into those businesses. So it's self-sustaining and allows our students a place to work. The project that you mentioned, that I was talking about on Dixwell, as there's a 4 to 5% annuity to the owner of that project, and we are kind of projecting a $200 million project, which means that $10 million will come to ConnCAT, who is the owner of that project, which will allow ConnCAT to be sustained in perpetuity.
So the nonprofit owns the corporation.
Exactly.
Awesome. And that will also prevent it from becoming the stereotypical evil corporation that just thinks about the company itself and not the people
I
in
think
the community.
what's important to note, and I appreciate you bringing that up, what's important to note is that myself and my Chief Operating Officer, Genevieve Walker, Anna Blanding, who is our Social Impact Investment Manager, Paul McCraven, who heads up ConnCorp, our board chair, who is a volunteer, that, we all get an annual salary. And this ConnCorp, or what we call ConnCAT Place, this project will not give us any more money than we would be making outside of our salary. And so that's really important to note that we are not a for-profit development corporation. We're a nonprofit organization that's doing doing a community development.
Yeah. So we've talked about the individual development level, the community development level, but all these, this is one community in one state, in one country, and these problems are pervading and have this underlying many underlying root causes. One of them is racial inequities. And so you're now working at the policy level in these two capacities on the Department of Education and on this new initiative that you're chairing.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that level of impact?
Absolutely. So I am a member of the State Board of Education, and I've always had an interest in the connection between poverty and education. And so my hope and the thrust of my being is to try and in some way revolutionize education, that it connects to poverty. I think that it influences poverty in some way. And I think a lot of times there have been, things created, whether they organizations or programs, that have allowed people to be comfortable in the poverty they're in, but while at the same time never really confronting poverty.
It's creating a poverty trap.
Absolutely. And so I look at it, education as a way to engage poverty and revolutionary education, I might say. And so being on the State Board of Ed has given me a kind of policy view of what really happens in a macro way. And then also I was asked to chair the board of this new organization called the Partnership for Connecticut, which is a public-private initiative, public Dalio Philanthropies, private Dalio Philanthropies, and public the state of Connecticut. And so Dalio Philanthropies has committed $100 million to the state, and the state is matching that $100 million, and we will raise another $100 million. So now there's $300 million spread over 5 years, $60 million a tranche, to engage two issues. One, disengaged, disconnected youth. These about 40-something thousand kids are disengaged or disconnected from education. And so we want to do something about that. And secondly, communities of poverty, where most of these kids are coming from. And so we want to inspire social entrepreneurship, community enterprises, and micro lending frameworks in these communities such that we create an economic infrastructure and capital formation in these impoverished communities. Again, connecting poverty to education, and doing something about both. And so I've been honored to serve as chair of that board with also your illustrious dean, who is on this board with me, Dr. Charles, with also Barbara Dalio, who is amazing, and 4 legislators. The governor is also on the board, and a woman named Yvette Melendez, Jan Hockadell, Sheena Graham, Garrett Moran, these incredible people who really believe in the transformation of humanity through education and through engaging poverty head on.
So it sounds like the goal of this partnership is to disrupt the status quo and change the system. And yet, maybe with the exception of yourself, as you shared with my class, you grew up in poverty. You make sure that everything you do ties back to that experience and to people still experiencing it. Others on the board represent the status quo, right? You have the government and the state that designed the current system. You have the philanthropic source that stems from a hedge fund or whatever kind of firm also propagates the system. And so how will you ensure that you aren't further, that you actually disrupt the system? will you ensure that the voices of the people you just mentioned, the youth and the communities, aren't just heard, but are actually leading? Will they have the platform to lead this change?
Yeah, that's a great point. And it is why when kind of helping craft the kind of inner mechanics of the partnership, the organization, we came up with a value set that each member will abide by, right? Because we are all coming from different places, and there are some very affluent people and privilege, people who live in privilege who are serving on this board. But we have one thing, more than one thing, but this one very thing in common is that we care about the welfare of humanity in a deep way. And so our efforts are really geared towards doing something about poverty, doing something about these kids who are not going to school. And if they are in school, they're really not present in school. And so we are, again, to your point, we're trying to create a platform, one, so these young people can be seen, and even more important, so they can be heard. And so it really doesn't matter in the end where folks are coming from, right? As long as we are unified in advancing this mission and believe deeply in our heart that we can really transform the lives of not only young people but communities through our efforts. And I don't think these people would be in it if in fact they didn't believe that, right? And so it is also, I think what's important is really imagining people who are suffering, imagining beyond their suffering, right? And that is what kind of the marker is for me. And when looking at these incredible people, right, can they imagine folks, especially Black and brown people, beyond their suffering? And they can, because they are laying it on the line, as with myself,
Maybe what you're saying, and a way to operationalize and translate what you're saying, is to imagine the counterfactual, what will look different if and when this succeeds, and what could be some indicators of those shifts in the status quo, and how will you measure that and set those as your targets and hold yourself accountable to progress against those changes.
Yeah, I think, seeing communities with thriving entrepreneurs, right? And I'm not saying entrepreneurs who are making a ton of money, but I'm saying entrepreneurs who now have enough. Seeing communities of people who now have enough. Seeing young people going to school.
Or why not making tons of money?
Or,
you know what I mean?
or that. Yeah, absolutely. I again, our efforts are about wealth building, right?
Yeah.
And wealth building in places where, folks.
And shifting the power balance.
Yeah, well, yes. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Shifting the balance of power. And in order to do that, of course, folks have to be uncomfortable, right? And those are folks who have the power. And so, like disrupting the power flow, right? Like that's really, really important, I think those things happen organically, right? But so I believe, quite frankly, Teresa, that people already have power. They just don't know it. Right. And
That
so we
might be
need
the
to,
case.
and so we need to awaken the latent power within everybody. Because I think for the most part, they have gotten implicit and explicit messages that they are powerless. And I say this, right, and I told your class today, although I live a life of relative privilege now, I lived in poverty longer than I've lived in privilege, so I understand both worlds, and I understand the messages that the people are getting, and I understand the lack of discomfort that people in power want to experience as it relates to the so-called powerless.
Yeah, and I think part of it is at the individual level, and part of it is at the structural level. So you can believe all you want that you have power, but if everything is working against you, then so I think that it has to be I think that your work is a microcosm of what is needed at the policy level, in the sense that we need indicators of change and pathways to change at the level of the individual. Does this person now have the confidence and connections and skills and all those things? And also at the infrastructural levels, in terms of what are the pathways available and what are the barriers and how have those changed.
Yeah.
So that's what I'd like to see going forward in terms of the goals and metrics that you're holding yourself accountable for.
Yeah, I think also, even more fundamentally, right? I think it's about creating opportunity, and from opportunity comes access, and from access comes resources, right? And most often, you know, communities of power usually look for opportunity, but opportunity means nothing without access. And that
Right,
means,
exactly.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that means access to networks, access to resources, you know, which then gets you to an ultimate happiness, right? But we stop at opportunity, and a lot of times people who create opportunity for those folks know that
Are like,
opportunity is not
check.
enough.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yesterday we had Caroline Smith visiting
Uh-huh.
my other section, and
Hmm.
she is a Yale alumna who co-founded Collab, an accelerator for entrepreneurs in New Haven. And she said that they measure two indicators of success so far: confidence and connection, in the sense that, do you have the confidence and skill to do something? And also, once you do, are you able to operationalize that? Do you have the connections to get things done? And so that resonated with me a lot. But she did recognize, as you said a few minutes ago, that it starts with feeling that you have the will and the worth,
Yeah.
and then building the infrastructure around that.
No, I mean, it starts with knowing that you have the right to be and to do. Every human being does. But for the most part, because folks' dreams have not been facilitated, nor their hope, that they don't believe they have the right to be and or do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's, to me, that's what everything starts with. And a lot of times, if not all the time, when folks' dreams aren't facilitated and their hopes aren't facilitated, those hopes and dreams that are now internal, will have been internal, become rage. And so the rage that you see is merely just dreams and hopes that were never, that were deferred. And so that's really important. Really important, you know, and this, there's a good friend of mine, Anola Aird, who started this community healing network. And she talks about the lie of inferiority, right? And then these implicit messages, especially, that black and brown folks or people who live in poverty are inherently inferior, right? And people believe that, right? But if in fact you believe you have the right to be and to do, then you can cut through that. And so I think it just starts very fundamentally. It starts there.
And you're operationalizing that at the three levels: at the direct service level with the training and job placement at ConnCAT, at the community level with revitalizing the Dixwell neighborhood, and hopefully at the state and policy level with these two initiatives.
Yeah, I never, you know, in the conversations we've had today before this, I never thought about it that way.
Well, the reason I think about it this way is because I'm influenced by Bill Drayton, who's an active figure in social entrepreneurship. He founded Ashoka Innovators for the Public, and he talks about these three levels of impact: direct service, when you're actually helping individuals, and then a higher level of changing patterns and trends and mindsets, like you're doing with the revitalizing the neighborhood, and then the highest level of influencing others and creating policy and, you know, expanding your impact that way. And so every time I meet a social entrepreneur, I'm always looking for those different levels, right? You start at the direct service, but your goal is not to be McDonald's to reach millions. Like, you're never going to reach everyone. You want to go to the root cause of the social challenges that you're tackling. And so then you have to take your work to the next level. So the example that we read in the textbook this week for this session that we had today was about a social entrepreneur who's an Ashoka Fellow in Peru, Albina Ruiz, who worked with waste pickers in Lima and helped organize them into service providers, and created a company out of what was already there in the community. People just, you know, where poverty meets trash. And over 20 years, this organization helped draft the legislation that later incentivized municipalities to work with waste pickers as service providers. So it's just to say that social entrepreneurship is a pathway that has multiple levels. Like, you roll up your sleeves, get your hands dirty at the direct service level, and then also you think about who are all the different stakeholders that have entrenched interests in this, whether they're part of the problem or trying to be part of the solution, and how can I build partnerships the way you're doing to try to influence the way they work together and try to influence policy.
Wow.
So that's what I wanted to highlight in our conversation today, is these different levels.
So I had never thought about it that way. You know, I didn't realize there was an academic discourse, right? You know, I often say, and I've even longer often thought that, you know, I've experienced a high level of success, but success was never the reason. It's been the result, and I've done well in life, in those three levels by merely wanting to help people. I had no idea there were levels, right? I think,
Maybe it just happened organically. Like as
yeah,
your direct service showed results, people rallied to support you so you
hmm
could take it to the community level. And then you were asked to or invited to join at the policy level. So one thing leads to another. And it all started with rolling up your sleeves, getting your hands dirty, and
that is
taking
true. That
action.
is true. I
Yeah.
appreciate you sharing that with me.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your stories of success. And I want to ask you for at least one story of failure, one mistake or mishap you did that you regret. Because we don't talk about these things enough. And I'm not going to let you go until we do.
No, I think I'm big on failure. I really am. I think you fail early and often. I had a couple of them. I'll start with what's top of mind for me. I remember building ConnCAT, and I remember, believing that and assuming, right, here I am, building this place, and we're going to train people who are unemployed and underemployed and who may be experiencing some poverty, and we're going to change their lives. And, I'm coming with this like basket of help to Newhallville and Dixwell especially. And for about a couple months in, and I was ready to kind of receive our first cohort of medical training, medical billing and coding and phlebotomy students, and no one was coming. And, I I called on the alders in the particular wards, Newhallville and Dixwell, and others, and asked them to come and meet me at ConnCAT. We had not opened yet. And I talked to them about what we were endeavoring to do and solicited them for their help to get the word out to their constituents, because, I I was failing at getting people to register for these classes, and I and I thought, I just assumed, right, just out of arrogance and ignorance, that
Build it and they will come.
yeah, they're gonna flood this place, and they weren't coming. And so the alders readily got the word out and really, really helped out. Now, what I didn't know, Teresa, was because I hadn't done my homework enough, that I didn't really understand the history of Science Park as it relates to the community it was in, where this particular, Winchester factory had closed down and totally decimated the communities on the periphery, who totally counted on Winchester for jobs. And that's understandable. And after it closed down, Science Park was supposed to be devoted to more industry jobs for the community. But it turned, and Science Park became a place for biotech and bioscience, which that wasn't the sweet spot for the community.
Right.
And so what was promised were jobs now turned into a gated piece of land
And
called
so why
Science
should
Park.
they trust you?
Exactly. And so here we are building in Science Park because we wanted to be in the midst of cutting edge technology while in a neighborhood that we thought really needed us. And, we built this thing in a place where people were like, we're not stepping foot in there. And so so it was difficult because they didn't trust us.
Yeah. And they're probably tired of people helicoptering into the community.
Absolutely. And they didn't believe
not
we would
co-creating
stay,
with them.
and so probably the thing I'm most proud of is that we kept our promise. But I totally failed in terms of my assumptions, my arrogance.
Engaging them from the start.
Yeah, and doing real deep engagement and sitting
And
with
market
the folks.
research.
Yes,
Yeah.
market
Is
research.
this wanted?
Yeah,
Is
and
this
hearing the
needed?
stories
Yeah.
of the people.
Right.
Right, I just took them for granted because they look like me. Right, and I thought they would just, they automatically.
You've got
it
it
just makes
figured out.
logic.
Right.
It's logical, right? Because I look like the people and I'm from them, and no. So yeah, that was a huge failure on my part in terms of just assuming and being arrogant and somewhat ignorant.
Okay, good lesson. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you, ma'am.
So building trust, building results, and hopefully building infrastructure and policy and legislation.
Yeah.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Erik,
you,
for sharing
Teresa.
your work with us.
I appreciate you.